Okay, it's 1 minute past 12, so I think we can start. So welcome to this Learn seminar. Today, Tom and I will present a paper that we wrote about the teacher employment industry in the Netherlands. So my name is Marjolein Camphuijsen. I'm an assistant professor at this department, and one of the focuses of my research is on the commercialization of education. Now, Tom, if you want to say something about your focus and your role.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Stolp. I'm a postdoc at the VU Amsterdam, but also at Vrije Universiteit, and I'm focused on teacher labor markets.
So then we start with the presentation just to make sure you can see the PowerPoint presentation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So many of you might know, so we wrote a paper about the teacher employment industry. Many of you might know that a number of teachers in primary and secondary education in the Netherlands are employed on the basis of a flexible working contract. And some of these contracts are negotiated with external employment agencies. So it's these external employment agencies that we are specifically interested in this paper, such as, for example, secondment agencies or temporary employment agencies. So in Dutch, detacheer or of uitzendbureaus. So in this paper, we try to get a sense of developments in the number of teachers that have contracts with these agencies, as well as what characterizes teachers that do, as well as their jobs. So we'll get to that, but I will start off telling a bit about the background to our study and our research questions, as well as the literature that we reviewed, and then Tom will continue with the methods and findings, and then we'll allocate some time for questions and discussion. So the starting point of the study was the observation that private actors and organizations increasingly seem to offer all kinds of goods and services to schools and families. Some scholars have argued that these private actors increasingly seem to have embraced the idea of education as a sector for investment and profit making. Of course, you could argue that the sales of goods and services to schools, as well as private educational provision through private schools, is nothing new. It's something that we have traditionally also seen. It's not new. But what we are seeing more recently is that private sector participation has expanded across a wide range of levels and activities. And some scholars have referred to the emergence of a so-called global education industry. This in order to characterize the growth of an educational market in areas such as assessment services, teaching and learning resources, educational technology, school improvement services, administration support, and edu-marketing, and so on. So what we do in this paper is that we show that one example of a rising form of private sector involvement in education, which at least to our knowledge so far has received relatively little scholarly attention, is the private sector practice of providing teaching services to public education. So what happens in this case is that privatized employment agencies, they take responsibility for teacher recruitment processes, or at least they take over some of the administrative duties and financial risks that are associated with hiring new employees. And this practice tends to involve a sort of triangular relationship between the employee, which is then the teacher, the organization where the employee works, the school, and a third party, the employment agency. So the teacher does no longer sign an employment contract with the school where the teacher works, but rather signs the contract with the agency. And the agency then becomes the teacher's formal employer. The agency also signs a servant contract with the school, and the school then pays the agency for the teaching services that it provided by the temporary teacher. So in the paper, we know that in some contexts, such as, for example, the UK, the number of teacher employment agencies has rapidly increased, and millions are also spent on temporary teachers. It appears, although we really need more research to confirm this, that these agencies often operate in contexts that face significant teacher recruitment and retention challenges. So perhaps not so surprisingly, a heated debate has emerged in these contexts about the benefits and the pitfalls of this form of private sector participation in education. So there are those who welcome this development, and they often argue that these type of external agencies are able to quickly fill vacancies for temporary work, which sometimes requires specific knowledge. And as a result, these agencies also contribute to the continuity of education. Also, schools presumably can more easily let go of teachers when services are no longer needed and employment risks tend to be low, or at least lower. And for teachers, for temporary teachers who work for those agencies, recruitment agencies often highlight the benefits of greater flexibility, increased pay, as well as the opportunity to work in different schools and classrooms. But there's also critics to this development. And critics have pointed, for example, towards the cost inefficiencies of using agencies. So there is some emerging evidence that highlights that schools often pay significant amounts of money to hire teachers via an agency. The limited influence of employees on the conditions of their employment has been highlighted, and some concerns have been raised about the effects of temporary teachers on education quality. However, here really a lot is still unclear, in part because we still lack a lot of research. But it might be that temporary teachers, for example, lack institutional knowledge, which they would acquire after working in the same school community for a long time. And they might also not feel as motivated to embed themselves when they know that they will soon leave again. This is something that we really need more research on, but this is at least perceived, for example, by school boards in the Netherlands to be the case. It might also be that temporary contracts attract different types of teachers, such that education quality is potentially affected. Well, regardless of these debates, relatively little remains known both about the effects, but also about the magnitude of current reliance on temporary teaching, sourced by these private employment agencies. And we believe that getting a better sense of the scale at which teachers are hired through these type of privatized employment agencies, as well as their characteristics, forms a very important first step towards understanding the impact of the employment industry on public education. So, yeah, in an attempt to contribute to this, in the paper that we are presenting, that this presentation is based on, we examine the teacher employment industry in the context of the Netherlands. So you could ask, of course, why the Netherlands? Well, as many of us will know, we have a significant teacher shortage in the Netherlands, which is also expected to increase in the near future. And it appears that schools are increasingly forced to also consider non-conventional ways of finding and hiring teachers, so as to ensure the continuity of schooling. And for those of us who read Dutch newspapers, media debates tend to highlight that a rising number of schools have also turned to these type of employment agencies in order to get teachers in the classroom. So in the wake of this, politicians and teacher organizations have expressed concerns about this form of private sector involvement in education, in part because, as I mentioned, there is this emerging evidence that schools often pay significantly more for teachers that are hired through these type of agencies. I see that someone raised their hands. Chris.
Yes, I also want to add to that another concern that that lives a lot in Amsterdam, at least, is that people, the teachers who are hired with these privatized firms, they also negotiate out all the negative activities that they want to do. Yeah. So, for example, they beforehand says, okay, I want to work at your school, but I don't want to have contact with parents. I don't want to be at the meetings. I only want to stand in front of the class. So that also creates a lot of inequalities between teachers. Yeah. So they don't do the negative work, but they get paid more, which is really perceived as a bad thing by schools.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're very right in pointing that out. And it's also something that these agencies actually use to recruit teachers.
Yeah.
You're only going to focus on teaching. You don't have to do all of the other work. Well, we are very interested also in what that means for, well, how schools respond to that. But that's maybe for future research to look at. So yeah, besides that they pay more, the teacher union has also highlighted that the strategies that are used by these privatized employment agencies to attract teachers might also make it increasingly difficult for schools to directly hire teachers. So for example, they can advertise you're only going to focus on teaching, but sometimes they're also promised a car, for example. So the VO-Raad in the Netherlands has referred to this form of private sector involvement in education as an example of the commercialization of the teacher shortage. So what we do in our paper is we examine the development in frequency and shares of temporary teaching contracts that are sourced by these private employment agencies in primary and secondary education in the Netherlands. We also depict the characteristics of temporary teachers that hold such contracts, and we compare them to the characteristics of teachers with regular labor contracts to see if there is a difference. And we depict the job characteristics of teachers with temporary contracts. So we look at what characterizes their job. So a little bit of background as to what type of contracts we are specifically interested in. So following previous research, we make a distinction between indefinite and flexible contract types. Different types of flexible contracts exist. And in this study, we distinguish the following as portrayed on the slide. One important distinction between these different forms of flexible contracts relates to the basis of the contract. So an employee can have a contract with the organization, the school where she works, or a contract with a third party, such as an employment agency. And in this paper, we are specifically interested in the latter three types of contracts, as in these cases, teachers negotiate their contract with a privatized employment agency. So at the start of our research, we reviewed the available literature. And as I already mentioned, relatively little scientific literature is available on the topic, but there are some exceptions, and it's worth very briefly noting what they have found. So in the context of the UK, the role of private sector agencies in the provision of temporary teachers has received some attention, although not very recent, but it's still interesting. So these studies show that the teacher employment industry was and still is quite significant. Differences exist in teacher characteristics between teachers who work as temporary teachers for employment agencies and regular teachers who are permanently employed in schools. So women and recent graduates are more likely to work as temporary teachers. Questions have also been raised about the quality of temporary teachers. So for example, one study in the UK showed that teachers that were confronted with issues related to their performance chose to resign and take on temporary teaching for an employment agency. Well, questions have also been raised about the status of temporary teachers, their involvement in the school, and relationships with permanent teachers. So some studies highlight that there is evidence to suggest that permanent teachers do not always react positively to their temporary teacher colleagues. And that might not be so surprising considering what Chris just mentioned.
And do you know if in these studies from the UK, at that time, was there a shortage as well in England, or was it?
Yeah, there was, yeah.
Okay, so it's a comparable situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then finally, also in the context of the Netherlands, some pieces of gray literature have looked at the private sector practice of providing teaching services. So in 2014, De Wit, Stuyvenberg, and Van der Ploeg, they relied on a survey among school boards in the Netherlands, and they showed that the majority of all sampled school boards had hired teachers through an employment agency. And they estimated that approximately 3% of all teachers working in compulsory education were employed on the basis of a temporary work contract, a secondment contract, payroll, or were self-employed workers. Well, in a more recent report issued by the government, the authors relied on figures based on a sample of school annual reports to see how much is spent on temporary work. And here an increase in school expenditures on temporary work was also found. But here it's unclear whether this is due to increased costs or an increase in the number of temporary teachers. So this is something we don't know. Now I will give the floor to Tom, who will tell you a little bit more about how we tried to get a sense of the employment industry in the Netherlands, as well as the composition of the temporary teaching workforce.
Okay, 1 second. For studying. Okay, do you see my screen? Okay, great. Yeah, so as Marjolein just said, so we are going to try to bring this, the skill and also development of temporary teachers in the Netherlands to light, also give some characteristics of these teachers and their jobs. And so the big advantage we have is that we're going to look at a nationally representative survey, right, which is also novel, so having also very recent data and really focusing also on the teachers, so not on the total expenditures that are then given to a temporary agency, to temporary working agencies, employment agencies. And so to do this, we're going to use the so-called CBS microdata, which is a basically a set of all sorts of data sources, also referred to by some as the CBS universe. And we're going to use two data sources. First of all, the enquête beroepsbevolking, which is a nationally representative labor survey, and also the so-called Spolusbus, which is registration data, mainly used to look at the income of all employees of the Netherlands. But there's also other job characteristics in this data set. Oh, wait, so let me, okay. So first of all, so the survey is, like I said, a nationally representative survey by the CBS. From 2003 onwards, it collects information of 110,000 individuals in each quarter. Individuals are also interviewed repeatedly over time, so it's a rotating panel. And like previously mentioned, I mean, it's very difficult to observe temporary teachers, right? I mean, this hasn't been done. And the reason is that, of course, they are employed by the temporary employment agency, right? So these could be workers at the assembly line or picking tomatoes, or they could be teaching. So we're going to use information from the survey in which people, first of all, state what their primary job is. And from this, we can make a distinction between two types of teachers. First of all, teachers in primary education, and second, teachers in secondary and vocational education. So this now we know. Second, we can also look at the type of employment contract they're working in. And of course, this is the crucial bit of information we're going to use to identify these teachers. In the survey, they state whether they are actually temporary teachers. And this means, specifically for the survey, that's important, they're in service of an employment agency, so in Dutch, an uitzendbureau. So we have these temporary teachers at the uitzendbureau, and then we also have the regular teachers, which are all other teachers. Now notice we're going to, to depict the development, we're going to use two definitions. So this is the narrow definition, because we only look at these employment agency teachers. So these are the teachers from the uitzendbureau. As Marjolein said, there's also other types of teachers, so other types of triangular relationships out there, right? So there's also payrolling and there's also data sharing. And especially data sharing is, again, it's kind of hard to come by, because if you're doing this interview, they could ask you, are you an uitzendwerknemer? And you might be a temporary teacher. You say, no, I'm not picking tomatoes. I work for a data share bureau, which is much more based on kind of knowledge, right? It's like a knowledge exchange. So again, we might be looking at a very narrow set here. But I'm going to tell you a bit more about the broad set a bit later. From the survey, we also collect other bits of information, which are the teacher characteristics, which are very basic: age, gender, education level, and migration background. So we also use this registration data that I shortly mentioned, which is called the Spolusbus. It is based on the data from the Insurance Employee Agency, the UWV, and it gathers information on all employees in the Netherlands from 2006 onwards on a monthly basis. So it's a very rich data source. And from this, we can see, first of all, also the employment contract. All right, so we can see whether they have a temporary contract. And this is a much broader one. So this also includes payrolling. This also includes secondment contracts, but also the temporary agency that I was talking about before. But this is, let's say, a very broad container, so we cannot make any distinction. So we have, next to the narrow definition, we now also have the broad definition, which is, first of all, individuals who state in the survey, I'm a teacher, either in primary or secondary education. And second of all, also are now categorized by this definition, which is much greater. From this photos, we can also have other information. First of all, hourly wage. We can also look at the hours worked or the full-time equivalent. And we can also see whether they have multiple jobs, multiple employment contracts. Okay, so there are some methodological notes. I mean, there's nothing fancy going to happen here. We're really just going to look at descriptive statistics. But it's important to notice that we're dealing with survey data, right? So even though the CBS, of course, is essentially made for collecting nationally representative data, they notice that it's not perfect. So they also provide sampling weights. So we use these sampling weights when we show depictions, or when we depict, frequencies or shares or distributions. Also, it's important to know that we have really a small number of observations. So that's also what makes this study, and I think overall makes it a difficult study. I mean, it's not such a big phenomenon. And so when you're dealing with survey data, the observations per year are often very small. So when we're going to show the development, we're going to use a moving average, right, which kind of smoothens it. We're really trying to show that, okay, what's kind of the long run development. And when we're talking about teacher characteristics, we're going to pull the data from 2016 to 2021. Okay, just to have enough, let's say, observations and enough power so we can actually say something about this, this group of teachers. And yeah, finally, we focus on the individual's main job, right? So we can identify the main job of the teacher, which is the job they spend most hours in during the month. But it might, of course, be that there are people out there who have as a second job, a teaching job, a temporary teaching job. So we don't observe these. So we're likely to underestimate the frequency of teachers who are in temporary teaching. Okay, so first of all, the development of temporary teachers. So the question is there an increase? What's the, well, not only is there an increase, but what's the size also? So Marjolein already put forth, there's a big debate about the cost and the benefit. Is it good? Is it bad? However, before we have the discussion, what's the scale of the problem, right? And is it actually increasing as we would expect? So this is our first figure. Here you see, like I said, we're going to use moving averages, right? So we're going to smooth it a bit because you see that if you look at the dotted lines, it's very erratic. That's because the number of observations are small per year. And you can see that both for the narrow, which is the blue curve, and the broad definition, which is the red one, there's an increase during the greatest part of the measurement period up till, let's say, 2017. And then there seems to be a bit of a decrease, right? And if you look at it, I mean, you can imagine, for example, during the pandemic, that might have something to do with it. That might have had maybe a bit of a structural impact. And if you look at the numbers associated with it, this of course depends on the definition, but at the top it would be 3,000 temporary teachers if you consider the broad definition, and about 1,000 in the narrow definition. If you look at the share, right, so I mean, here we have the frequency, so you would also want to maybe contrast it to the total amount of teachers. We see a very similar development. So also the share actually increases, which is also very much in line with all the signals that we've been receiving over the last years, and also related to the teacher shortage. Only more recently, there seems to be a bit of a drop, but this could be related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we look at secondary and vocational education. So during my presentation, I'm going to talk about a lot about secondary education, or at least in all the tables and graphs, it's going to be secondary, but I also mean vocational education. So this should be corrected, but yeah, unfortunately, I haven't had any time. So much like primary education, there is an initial increase. Also, the sample period here is somewhat shorter due to missing information. But you see up until, let's say, 2017-18, there's an increase in the numbers. The numbers are somewhat higher in comparison to primary education. And afterwards, there seems to be a stabilization or a small decrease even, depending on the definition that is used. And also, if you consider the share, it's a very similar pattern. So up to this point of 2017-18, there's an increase, and then there's a decrease again. So it also seems that over the longer run, there seems to be an increase, and now in the more recent period, there might be some change. Okay, so next, first of all, we talked about the development. We're also interested in the characteristics of the teachers. So first of all, I mean, these are going to be very explorative findings, right? Where we're going to look at the characteristics of temporary teachers, and we're going to contrast them with regular teachers. And some kind of underlying interesting questions are, well, I mean, are these private organizations providing different types of teachers, right? I mean, if they're doing so, this might also have an effect on the quality of education. A second is, there might also be differences in teacher sorting, right? So do these contracts attract different types of teachers? And the question could be, well, the question is why? Marjolein already mentioned, I mean, in the UK, this was apparently, these are kind of the bad performing teachers. And you can think of employment agencies providing very insecure contracts. So these people sort into this because they have no other option. You could also look at it in another way. I mean, if they don't have to do any kind of managerial task, they have no administrative task, this might be a very nice job for them, right? And so some people will think, hey, this is the kind of job I like, which matches my preferences. So this could, looking at these teacher characteristics, could be kind of the first portal in finding out more about these underlying questions. So we're going to look at gender first. To the left, there's primary education. We see that both in temporary, which is blue, and regular, which is orange, they're mostly females working in primary education, which of course won't surprise you. But we see that there are relatively more males working under a temporary contract. With a secondary education, it seems to be more leveled, so half-half when it comes to men and women. But again, we also see that men are relatively more likely to work under these temporary contracts. Then when it comes to age, we see this for primary education. Considering the temporary workers, 60% is young, meaning that they're 35 years old or less. And for the rest of the age categories, it's approximately evenly distributed. If you contrast this to regular teachers working on the regular contracts, it's, let's say, much more evenly balanced, right? So there's much less young teachers. And so we can say that in primary education, these temporary contracts, they attract mainly young workers or young teachers. When we consider secondary education, so secondary and vocational education, it's qualitatively the same. However, it seems that there are a bit less young workers working on these temporary contracts. But again, I think the message here is that these temporary contracts attract young teachers in comparison to regular teachers. So we can look at education level. So there's three categories. One, there's vocational training, there's applied sciences, HBO, and there's university. And we can see that if we compare the distributions of temporary and regular teachers in primary education, it's mostly the same. However, for secondary education, there seems to be a difference, especially somewhat more vocationally trained teachers are attracted to temporary contracts, and somewhat less university trained teachers are attracted to these contracts. And now finally, we can go to migration background. We see that for primary education, still the majority has, well, quite obviously not a migration background, but we see that relatively a lot of teachers with a non-Western migration background are attracted to these temporary contracts, and somewhat less with a Western migration background. And if we consider the secondary and vocational education, it's the same story, right? Except then for the selection of temporary contracts by Western migration background teachers. So just in sum, I mean, we find that these temporary teachers differ on the basis of characteristics, namely age and gender, education level in the case of secondary and vocational education, and also in terms of migration background. And so again, this might be a first kind of way of thinking about these further questions. So how does this deviant inflow affect educational quality? And why does this happen? So what's the reason for the fact these different type of teachers sort into these contracts? Then we can look at some job characteristics. So what type of contracts are negotiated for temporary teachers? These are, again, explorative findings, right? It's interesting to think about what these temporary teachers sort into. So there's been a lot of kind of buzz about or rumors that temporary teachers, that they make crazy money and that they drive around and that they get cars and this kind of stuff. So we're trying to get a bit closer to this by looking at their hourly wage, for example. But also it kind of gives you an insight in, hey, what kind of buttons might you want to change, right? Well, okay, now that might be a bridge too far, but it at least shows you what kind of job attributes they sort into. So first of all, hourly wages. So to the left, there's primary education. You see that on average, regular teachers earn a lot more. And this is also the case for secondary education. Now, of course, this might not be so strange, all right, or this might not come as a surprise, because I've just shown you that if you look at the characteristics of teachers with temporary contracts, there's a lot, they are a lot different, right? So there's a lot more young teachers. So obviously they might earn on average a lot less. So what we do next is we correct for these factors. So we do just a very simple linear regression, which we regress hourly wages on one, whether they are temporary teachers or not, and we correct for the characteristics I just mentioned. And then you see that the wage gap decreases to 2.58 euros for primary education and 2.99 euros for secondary and vocational education. I mean, an obviously missing variable here, if you would really want to come to the answer on, hey, are they now making the same wage, yes or no, would be to include teacher experience, because this is missing. Oh, Chris, I see you have a question.
Yeah, actually, this is a question asked by Martijn, but I'm also very curious because now I see the results. So you have in the polis, you have temporary workers, but you also have people who really are a temporary worker because they have like an uitzendbaan. But I looked up the translation, which was temporary worker again. So you have two types of temporary workers. So I wondered, are all the temporary workers that you distinguished actually temporary workers that are hired not by the school but by this commercial party?
Yes. So
okay.
The thing is, and that's still a bit of the difficulty. Are you meaning that you could also be a temporary worker in the sense that you are a detacheringswerker who is basically lent from one school to the other?
No, you can also be a starting teacher who has like a 1-year contract. Mm-hmm. And then after a few years, the school doesn't have money to make you a permanent, to give you a permanent, like universities, right? Yeah, so you have to go to a different university to have another temporary contract. Yeah. Well, this really is about, I would say, baansoort is code 11. You're really hired by the school as a temporary worker by the agency. Because that can matter enormously if you look at the wage difference, I thought. But if you really chose this subgroup, then it should be all right?
No, yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, these are for sure in service of the temporary employment agencies, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you.
Okay, so that's hourly wage. Now we come to the full-time equivalent. We see that in primary education, about the FTE is 0.73 for regular workers, and it's much lower, at least substantially lower for temporary workers, 0.63. That's also the amount for temporary workers in secondary and vocational education, and also much lower, right, than the teachers working under regular contracts. Now, finally, look at multiple jobs. So I knew from previous research that temporary workers, they often have a lot of jobs, right? And that might also be something that they're interested in, right? That's why they do it, so they can switch around. They have a lot of new experiences. And so also here we see that if you think of primary education, we see that approximately 6% of the teachers with regular contracts has a second job that we identify in the polis, right? So this could be any job. And we see that 22 have another job if they're working under a temporary contract. And we also see this difference, albeit somewhat less dramatic for secondary and vocational education teachers. And here you can essentially also do the same trick, so to say, so you can correct for different characteristics, because it might be, okay, so you're dealing with young workers, right? Or you're dealing with young teachers, hence they often have more jobs, they're much more mobile. But you actually see that very little difference manifests when you correct for these background characteristics. So where you see for wages, right, that there's a lot of difference, there's little difference here. Okay, so to conclude, we show that the amount and the share of temporary teachers in primary and secondary education more than doubled, and so it's really increased. If you look at the size, I mean, it's debatable. It's still somewhat difficult to put your finger on, but you see, I think at the height that it could be anywhere between 1,000 to 4,000 workers, 4,000 teachers. They're relatively young, male. They have a migration background relatively often. And also they work less hours on average, and they also earn less, but this is still, I mean, let's say up to some fine tuning of the regression model. And so, yeah, I mean, really on the basis of this, we would like to, do further research. So we've also done a grant proposal in which we would like to look at the impact of increased reliance on temporary teachers on educational processes and outcomes, and also on the motivations and abilities of temporary teachers. So is there a group of teachers who are not willing to work under regular contracts, but are willing to work, for example, under temporary contracts? Or is it really had this kind of race to the drain? So the teachers who are, let's say, of lowest quality, who can't find anything else, is sorted into these very kind of insecure contracts, which are given by temporary employment agencies. So yeah, this was it. I mean, we have some questions. So first of all, if you have any questions, please ask the questions. And otherwise, we are very interested to hear your opinion on some questions of our own. So yeah, let's start with questions you might have yourself.